following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
There were really two choices there. Is either we build our own indexing technology as a kind of a walled garden internally and we get the data that way, or we try to use an open protocol like the graph. And really there is only the graph as a solution right now that gives you that level of flexibility.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Raphael Mazet, CEO at SimpleFi, an innovative DeFi analytics platform that enables users to make better decisions and optimize their crypto portfolio. SimpleFi is also a Wave 4 Grant Foundation grantee, and Raphael will share how SimpleFi used the grant for subgraph and dapp development. Raphael is a true entrepreneur who has an impressive academic background that led to an early career in international business, including holding key positions in traditional financial firms and a brief stint as a lobbyist. Raphael will share how he developed conviction for how DeFi can impact people all across the world and how he became a full-time entrepreneur. We began the conversation by exploring Raphael's educational and professional background, starting with a question about the current enthusiasm about crypto in Lisbon, Portugal, Raphael's home.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a great vibe here. There's tons of people that are moving over to Portugal. And that's actually not just Web3 people, but from all sectors. It just seems like it's attracting a lot of really accomplished, really cool people that are doing interesting things and that are open to new experiences. In some ways, I feel like it's a bit like being back at university. You know, like everybody's new, everybody's meeting each other, finding their feet. But I mean, there are some obvious reasons for which people are coming. There's like a really great tax regime, especially for crypto people. I mean, there's one in general. There's the golden visa and the non-habitual resident status that gives you fiscal advantages. And then there's no capital gains tax on crypto if you do it non-professionally, as in if you're not trading professionally. So that's definitely been a draw. But I think it's also just a destination now. Probably, you know, I mean, for me, it was after a year or so of lockdown in London, I just needed a break. And Portugal is so open, you know, people are super friendly. It's sunny, great weather, great people. And then I just had a bunch of friends that were moving. So it definitely, and then the communities form here, right? There are some really great crypto people here as well.
So I want to talk about your professional and educational background. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I studied a lot because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I started with law. I did my undergrad in law. Then I did a master's degree in political science. Then I did a gap year. So this was all in France. And then I did a gap year in Colombia, in Bogota, where I was supposedly studying. But I still managed to learn Spanish. And then came back and I did another master's degree in London, which was all about media. It was media studies. And then after that, I actually went into financial PR. So I was a financial spin doctor. I was the guy who was talking to the Financial Times and, you know, CNBC, trying to put through the messages that our clients were trying to put through. So I did a lot of M&A stuff or IPOs, you know, with traditional finance companies and all kinds of sectors, actually. And then progressively, I got more into government relations, into lobbying. I did that in London. I also did that in Brazil. So I was working with big multinational companies in Brazil, lobbying the various governments about whatever it was that they wanted to accomplish. And then after that, I actually decided to become an entrepreneur. So the first startup that I did was a Web2 startup. It was all about online campaigning. So I wanted to get people to do more than just like a Facebook page or sign a petition and take action, you know, real world action. So that went quite well in terms of like taking action, but the whole business model there was predicated on people making donations as well. And they weren't really doing that on the app. So from a commercial standpoint, it wasn't really working. And we started digging into that. I'd always been following Bitcoin. I was nerding out on Ethereum a little bit, just like wondering how it could fit into what I was doing. And that whole transparency around donations seemed to be a pretty big problem. And that's when everything sort of started clicking into place, because we could use the blockchain to help people track the impact that their money actually makes. So we built this kind of escrow system on chain. When I say we, my co-founders at the time, an escrow system that works, if you're familiar with social impact stuff, it worked like social impact bonds, but fully on chain. So donations were escrowed, only paid out to charities when the goals that they were saying that they were going to achieve were actually achieved, and that would unlock them. But obviously, charities need money up front to actually carry out those goals. So what they could do is sell the cash flow at a discount to investors. So they have the money up front. The donors have full transparency on whether their money's making any impact. They get it back if it doesn't. And then investors can back the projects if they believe in the charities and make a return on that basis. And that was, it was great. It was a great adventure. It was really early. We started end 2015, early 2016. So there was nothing. There was no DAI. There was no really block explorers or anything like that, or barely, So we ended up rolling a lot of our own technologies there. We did the first use case for a regulated stablecoin in the UK, and amongst many other things, all the conferences, all the things. But then when the bear market hit, so working in a bear market with real world charities is, let's say, it's humbling. and at that point, it was already social DeFi, if you think about it. And I got even more into DeFi. I played around with some protocols, co-founded a fixed rate lending protocol, and then eventually just started degenning back in 2020, 2021, did DeFi summer, and eventually carried on through necessity, started building SimpleFi because I couldn't keep track of whether I was making money or not,
So we're talking today because of your role at SimpleFi and its relationship and some of its use case with the graph. Before we turn our attention to that, I want to ask you a follow-up question about that journey you described into entrepreneurship. What do you think it was that drew you towards entrepreneurship and captured your attention and interest?
The first thing when I first started is I think I wanted to have an element of control, or more control over what I was doing. I just wanted to see if I could just come up with a vision and then just execute it and be the only architect. Obviously, I had co-founders, right? But if we could build this together and not have to cater to somebody else's agenda and things like that. So it was more the challenge of really having to start everything from scratch, because up until that point, I'd also been working with big multinationals. Sometimes you can feel like a bit of a cog in the wheel. You can't get your messages across. If you think that something should be done in a certain way, you get vetoed or whatever. So this was really the opportunity to do that. And then as things progressed, I think what really got me hooked after a while, because it's tough being an entrepreneur, right? But what got me hooked was really just building useful things. And that's something that I learned very quickly, is that it's better when you're building for problems that are really relevant to you, that things start working out.
How do you think being an entrepreneur in crypto and in Web3 is different than being an entrepreneur outside of it?
That's a really great question. Having done both, having worked outside of crypto and inside crypto, especially at the time that I got in, right? Because I started building back in 2016 in the Web3 space. Everything was really new, much smaller and much more collaborative. I think, that obviously there's a lot of open source projects out there, Web2 open source projects, but there was really this feeling, especially at the beginning and, even now, of just people helping each other, much more informal, much smaller community, especially at the beginning. So you'd end up meeting everybody that mattered, everybody who could help. Whereas in traditional entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship outside of Web3, I think it was much more of a zoo. I lived in the Bay Area for a while. That was an experience, raising funds and all the things and meeting people there. It just seemed like a much bigger beast and much more formatted in a way. I don't know how else to explain it. Whereas there was, and there still is, this sense of freedom or greater freedom in the Web3 space when you're building. It's like just this big blue open ocean.
What do you think about people who say bear markets are for builders? A lot of the best builders, a lot of the best projects emerge from those time periods. What's your opinion on that?
Definitely prefer bull markets. I'll tell you that. I'm not going to go so far as to say, I love a good bear market, because that would just be too much self-flagellation. No, I lived through, as I was saying, it was great building the first couple of years, 2016, 2017. It was super easy, I guess, because, the space was pretty flush. You could get things done relatively easy. And then everything dried up in the bear market. And I've been hodling since 2016. So, there's a lot of scars there. I kept hodling throughout the bear market, and it definitely wasn't easy. But, I'd agree. Definitely, it flushes out a lot of the insanity, because in a bull market, just anything gets funded. All the tokens start exploding. People start forking left, right, and center, coming up with nonsense. All the normies come in, new people to crypto, and they're like, hey, have you heard of this? And you look at it and you're like, wow, there's such a scam or such a rubbish project or something that's already been done and failed, and I don't understand why people are still into it. So it just brings out a lot of this scammy or bullshit stuff. Whereas the bear markets definitely is where there's probably a lot more innovation that happens, a lot more serious building. Or maybe it's more that what is being built is more relevant. There's none of the frothiness.
A theme that's developed in the podcast, especially with people like you that have a lot of diversity in their background, both educationally and professionally, is that they use a lot of the skills and strengths they developed in their former life. Is that the case with you? Are you using all this different background that you have in what you presently do?
Yeah, I mean, look, definitely. So maybe not the legal stuff, because I only did it for 3 years. I only did my undergrad, and any lawyer will tell you that an undergrad doesn't know anything about the legal sector after 3 years. But definitely, it's helped. That bit has helped just with investment agreements, any kind of agreements. I know how to read a contract. I feel comfortable with them, things like that. So, and some things that you need to look for, and then as the experience builds, it just starts becoming something that's anchored in your brain. There's like a second nature, right? And I think the media studies that I did and the previous work that I did in PR and lobbying are definitely something that attracted me or made me very attracted to the crypto space, because, part of the job in financial PR or any PR and lobbying is just to defend your one message. And generally you're defending it against another competing message, right? And so it's a world of half truths and embellishments and things like that. That's not necessarily always the most transparent, because transparency just doesn't get the work done. Sometimes if you're fully transparent, you're not doing a good job in selling a specific message, right? You don't want to expose all the skeletons in the closet for obvious reasons. Whereas this is what's nice about the crypto space, is that everything is transparent. And that's how I started, right? With transparency for charities, but also like it's what allows us to do things like SimpleFi, where all of the data is on chain and we can start just processing all of that and building analytics on top and all that good stuff. I think one other thing that's probably helped me a lot is when you're a consultant like I was, you're just used to networking. So it was like very formative in that sense. And you need that because it's all about community building in this space, tons of conferences and things like that. So if you're not comfortable networking with people, it's good. Let's say it's good to have those skills where you can just easily talk to people, adapt, adjust to whatever they're saying and build that community.
So if you're willing to do this, if you put on that PR lobbyist cap again, and you think about Web3, a term in itself that is misused, misunderstood, all the different things that kind of go along with this emerging concept of what Web3 is. If we could wake up tomorrow and you led the charge on messaging about Web3, what would be your message if you were in front of the world and had the opportunity to drive that?
Oof, that's a tall order. And, also because I think there are some great groups that are doing that already, right? So all of these lobbying groups that have been set up to really defend the space, I think have been doing an awesome job. So I don't think that I'd necessarily change anything to what's currently being done. Like it really seems that we're playing with the big boys and girls, in Congress in the States, but also here in Europe, engaging with governments, engaging with institutional actors, banks and things like that. When I started back in 2015, 2016, it really was Wild West, right? And crypto was just seen as evil. It's all money laundering and things like that. It was really hard to get a bank account, even when you were backed by the government, because we got a few grants from the government and things like that. And I've definitely seen things evolve. And, all these themes around efficiency, permissionlessness, openness, transparency, etc. I think they're starting to really hit home. And then you see situations, even now, they're really tragic. Obviously, there's a war going on, but you can start seeing that donations can be made in crypto, makes it easier for people to be able to get on with their lives and receive that money. You see also the downfalls of what a centralized system can do, right? So there are truckers protesting in Canada and getting their bank accounts frozen, and that can't happen. So I think it's really just emphasizing those points that is really going to drive the space forward. That being said, there's always the other side, because there's no denying the fact that there's also just tons of scammy behavior in this space, tons of like unwarranted hype, people getting rugged, people getting scammed, people just buying rubbish and getting overexcited, and just like this hyper financialization of things that I think is like the flip side of the coin, right? I don't see that there's anything that you can really do about that, because it's just human nature. So it's just about continuously emphasizing and promoting the really serious projects, the liberation technology, that's out there that can really make a difference, empower people to be more financially independent and more free, to build systems with like-minded people in a way that they're not going to be prevented from doing.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dapps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. As a graph advocate and a member of the Graph Advocates DAO, I've had the opportunity to meet with members of the graph community from all across the world. I'm in awe and I'm inspired about the people you can meet, the places you can discover, and the passion that you will find in the graph community. On June 2nd, members of the graph ecosystem will be meeting in San Francisco, California for Graph Day. Many of you will be there, and I'm excited to meet other graph advocates who will be making the trip. Please visit the show notes for information on how to purchase a ticket, and don't forget, you can apply for a scholarship if you need some extra help in attending. I can't wait to see you there. So is it safe to say that the way you're approaching this Web3 movement or revolution that we're really early on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's very early. If you look at what we're doing at SimpleFi right now, we're really catering to the degens and the whales. But the ultimate goal for what we want to do is make DeFi accessible to everyone. And, it's still really overwhelming and difficult to engage with DeFi protocols if you don't know what you're looking for or what you're looking at. Like, oh, this DeFi thing sounds interesting. Let me get in there. And it just becomes, it's great because you fall down that rabbit hole, and a lot of people are falling down there and just discovering all of this incredible technology and how empowering it can be and all the rest. But people also don't know where to start. And that's kind of like the original impulse for SimpleFi is like, okay, how do I start? How do I engage with these DeFi protocols? What makes sense for my risk appetite as well? What's safe, what's not safe? What are other people doing? It's just growing so quickly, and there's so many projects. That how do you even start to make sense of that? And you can see the space that we're in. It's still a relatively small market, relatively small amount of total value locked as well, even if you just look at that metric. I mean, we haven't even started eating TradFi's lunch yet, but it's slowly coming.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about SimpleFi. I want to ask one more question, though, about your entrepreneurial journey here. And the way I want to ask it is, let's assume you can create a bucket and dump all the experiences and lessons you've learned as an entrepreneur into this bucket. What are some of the top lessons that you've learned that you think, hey, I can share with listeners that are about to go on that journey and save them some time and some heartache?
So there are a lot of things. So first of all, to your question, the first lesson is there will be heartache. So that's just something you have to be prepared for, because it's going to come. It's really not easy to be an entrepreneur. You've got to expect that it's not all going to go your way, and actually you've got to pace yourself. There's this whole vibe that I didn't love, or it's not the whole culture, but there was a part of the Silicon Valley culture when I was there that was all about that you've got to work 20 hours a day, never sleep, always on the job, and that it's just not sustainable. And I being an entrepreneur is a very long-term journey, I find, because the likelihood that you strike gold on your first idea is very low. So you're probably going to end up either pivoting multiple times, and you have to pivot. You have to be flexible like that. You have to be open. Or you're going to have a failed company and then start another one and maybe fail on that one and then start again until you find the right mix of things that correspond to your entrepreneurial style and all the rest. So I think it's very important to pace yourself, essentially, and try not to be too hard on yourself. But then at the same time, what you need, or at least this is how I approach it, is just like this hardcore, resilient, attitude that no matter what happens, you're going to keep trying, keep pushing, and not give up, even if it means pivoting or failing something. But you just keep doing it step after step. And if you see it that way, as more of a journey, then I think you probably save yourself a lot of the heartache, because there's going to be times when you're going to look at yourself and go, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And then other times you just like something incredible happens, everything starts going your way for a month or 2 months or whatever, and you feel like you're on top of the world. So that manic depressive stuff can be quite hardcore. You've got to just try to keep an even keel.
When I've thought about what makes an entrepreneur, I've always felt like it's that moment you just described there. Lots of people have ideas, lots of people are passionate about things, but when they get to the precipice of needing to push forward or change directions and go back to something either more convenient, easier, or just less risky, an entrepreneur pushes forward. If I'm right about what makes an entrepreneur and what doesn't, how would you explain to listeners what it is in you, in your mind, in your heart, that when you're at that precipice, you actually push forward?
Yeah, it's basically do or die in a way. I think it's just a mindset that you're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other and just keep going. And it's hard. It's a bit like, I'm not an athlete by any means, but, like when you listen to athletes or when you're doing it, when you're just training, and if you've ever had a personal trainer and they're just shouting at you, you're like, one more push up, I can't. Yes, you can. It's because it's all in the mind. It's like, your mind is going to be screaming, I can't do this anymore. I'm fed up. It's too much pain. It's too much effort. It's too much whatever. But if you can, I think almost every entrepreneur I know has is just this ability to knuckle down and push through that pain barrier and keep going. Because if you have a strong enough vision of where you're going, then eventually the light starts going at the end of the tunnel, and then you're out of the tunnel. There's probably another tunnel just after that first tunnel, but you just carry on.
Oh, it's almost as though entrepreneurs are just gluttons for pain.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a little bit of that. It helps if you're a little bit masochistic, definitely.
Let's turn our attention now to SimpleFi. You've brought it up a couple times here, but I'd like to reset for listeners. What can you tell us about what SimpleFi is and what it does? So
SimpleFi is a DeFi analytics platform. It helps you do things like automatically calculate your ROI, your return on investment, and it helps you optimize your portfolio. So if you're LPing or if you're yield farming, then it'll give you data that allows you to increase your yield, essentially. And then there's an execution layer that allows you to just act on the decisions that you're making. So it's partly a decision-making tool. It'll tell you what's performing, what's not performing. It'll make some suggestions as to where you could potentially look to improve your portfolio. Being very careful with the words I say because we don't provide financial advice, right? But it does give you the data to take those decisions. And then once you've made those decisions, it's the ability to execute them without having to go through 50 different UIs.
And I know you've thought a lot about this. I'm picking up that you're the type of guy that considers these things. How is SimpleFi different than from other options in the market or competitors?
Yeah, so actually, I started hacking this together a little over a year ago, just because, as I said, I'd fallen way down the DeFi rabbit hole, had co-founded like this fixed rate lending protocol initially, a little bit like Aave, but with a fixed rate. This was before DeFi Summer. It was before Compound did their yield farming stuff and all of this. But I got bitten by the bug and I just started degenning, really. Wi-Fi, sushi, all of the food tokens and all of that. And so I was making heavy use of those OG DeFi dashboards at the time, like Zapper. And Zapper is a great tool because it shows you where you're invested and I could keep track of where I was, which was super helpful, but it wasn't doing the main thing that I wanted, which is, am I actually making money, or am I losing it? Because you'll ape into a 1,000% APY yield farm and you take out your money 2 weeks later and you've lost half of it. Like, how? Why? And I was trying to keep everything up to date. I'm sure a lot of people do this as well, in some kind of spreadsheet. But if the UI is not great on a yield farm, you have to unstake it to see how many LP tokens you have or whatever, or you have to go and query the contracts directly. It's just a pain. And then once you've just composed all of these strategies, keeping track of them, you have to rewind everything. It just becomes a big mess. And the tools at the time just didn't offer any of that. And I couldn't understand why. So I just went about it. Originally in my mind, it was like, okay, it's Zapper with bells on. It's Zapper with a bit of ROI on top and let's hack it for myself. And then when I presented it at ETH Denver last year, the virtual ETH Denver, and like the level of interest was insane. So it became a company essentially, because a lot of people are saying, I really need this. It's a real pain point for a lot of people. Everybody, from just normal DeFi users to funds and everything in between. And then as we were building it, so I brought on board my co-founder, Filippo, who's also a bit of a degen. But more than that, he's got a computer science background. He did his PhD in machine learning and 3D printing. So we started looking at how we could calculate all this ROI, because the hack that I'd done was very, very manual. It wasn't very scalable. It was all in the front end. It was just it was just not very scalable. So we started looking at how we could do this. And essentially, if you want to calculate somebody's ROI, what you need to do is you need to index their balance or the balance of their account at every block on every DeFi protocol, on every chain. You need to price that historically, and then you need to relate somehow the liquidity pools with the yield farms so that you don't start double counting returns and things like that. And for a machine learning guy, that's like a wet dream, pretty much, because he started looking at it, he's like, well, yeah, definitely you can calculate ROI, but there's so much more that we can do here. We can start doing optimization recommendations. We can run algorithms on this. We can do predictive analytics. If people want to build a tax app, they can do that. If you want to build a Spotify for DeFi, whatever it is that you want to do, then you can build that as well. So it shifted from this is another DeFi dashboard or maybe a slightly better DeFi dashboard to, okay, this is like a really hardcore picks and shovels DeFi analytics layer that we can build as a public good and provide to the community as a whole.
Raphael, I think for a lot of listeners, and I'm being a little bit presumptive, but they don't understand all the things they can do when they purchase crypto. So for example, I think a lot of people that are new to this space buy crypto on a centralized exchange, or maybe if they're really adventurous, they've done it on a decentralized exchange, and then they just hold it. And to your point, maybe they have a spreadsheet, they're trying to track how it's performing. But then you bring up all these different things like yield farming. Maybe as a basics 101 to DeFi, what are the different things or the different ways people who have purchased crypto, what they can do with it to explore ROI and growth of the asset?
I'm definitely I'm not an ETH maxi or an anything maxi. And I'm definitely not a Bitcoin maxi, right? I mean, I think Bitcoin's a great technology, obviously, but it's something that at the time I'd kind of looked at and was interested in, but it's only when Ethereum came about, like in 2014, 2015, that things really started clicking about how you can use this technology. So for me, it's never really been about buying, holding, trading. I know so many people are into that. And that's probably the first thing that you think about when you think about crypto. And I see it when I just explain what I'm doing to normie friends or just random people that I meet, and I was like, okay, I'm into DeFi. They don't necessarily know what DeFi is. Take a step back. I mean, crypto. And immediately they just start thinking about trading. And it's not about that. It's about the financial services that you can build on top. It's about not replacing the traditional financial system, but kind of improving it or building a parallel system that is much easier to access and much easier to build on. So when you access SimpleFi, when you look at your portfolio, it's not like CoinGecko or BlockFi or anything like that. It doesn't tell you how much you've made from just buying and holding assets. It really just focuses on how much you've made from providing liquidity or investing in DeFi protocols. And then gives you data on how you can improve that. If you have any idle assets sitting in your wallet, where can you stake them? Where can you provide them as liquidity? If you've got some idle LP tokens, liquidity pool tokens, are you putting those in a farm? And which farm are you putting them in? With the same assets, how much more could you have made over the last 3 months if you'd put them in this combination of strategies and protocols rather than the other one that you actually did? And I think it's important that people start understanding that. It goes back to the whole Web3 meme, in that for me, Web3 is really this sort of collective of systems and protocols and services that are being built that aren't just the speculative aspect of just holding and trading tokens.
So, for example, for listeners then in the United States, if they own and have purchased some assets on, let's say, Coinbase, they can connect their wallet to SimpleFi, and just like you described there'll be some optimization suggestions and different ways to track their ROI and participate in these different pools?
Yeah, that's it. So they have to use one of the decentralized non-custodial Coinbase wallet, obviously, because everything that we track is on-chain. So it doesn't really connect to the centralized exchanges yet or the centralized staking mechanisms that they put out, which, by the way, I have nothing against. It's just we're really focused on the decentralized stuff. And that's it. Yeah. So there's just a lot more to buying tokens than sitting on them or trying to buy and sell them and try to make a profit. I'd say actually it's a bit of a shame to just buy them and sit on them, especially if you're buying some DeFi tokens, like from the really top DeFi protocols like Aave or Uniswap or whatever it is. Well, actually, you can probably earn those tokens while providing liquidity and doing something useful in the system, earning fees as well on top of that, and essentially getting free money rather than having to go and buy the crypto itself. It all depends on your strategy. But it's just a very narrow view to buy the tokens themselves and not participate in the underlying systems that are generating them, or that these tokens are. Generally, tokens are incentivizing some kind of behavior, and it's kind of the gateway drug for me to actually getting involved in the DAOs, in the protocols, in the systems, in the community.
Hi, this is Raphael Mazet with SimpleFi. If my conversation with the GRTiQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTiQ podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Roger that.
Have you and your partners on the back end of this run any analytics to say, wow, when people do use the tool, they see an increase in certain ways, either in the performance of their assets or exposure to more opportunities?
So right now, it's hard to run those analytics because we're still in closed beta. Perhaps by the time that you air this podcast, the beta will be open, but at least it'll be very close to being open. And if you're really good, if you join the Discord and send us a message, maybe we'll we'll let you in, especially if you were listening to this podcast. So yeah, it's hard to run those analytics right now because the user base is a bunch of power users, still very small, and they tend to know what they're doing. But that's exactly what we're aiming for, is that you can just, instead of spending your life on Twitter or Discord trying to find opportunities and trying to figure out where you should put your money, and actually if you're making money at all to start off with, then you just connect to SimpleFi and just make it kind of your daily habit, to go and check your investments and then see recommendations, other things you could do with them, and shift if you want to, or just sit on it for the time being.
And how then does SimpleFi make money?
So SimpleFi for the foreseeable future probably won't make money because we want to get as much feedback from users as possible, and it'll be a free tool for the foreseeable future. But eventually, there are three ways that we plan on monetizing this. The first one is from API calls, because as well as having a front end, they'll be very open and modular. Actually, that we want to make it so that anybody can build any app, DeFi Analytics app that they want on it. Then, as well as the front end, there'll be an API. Probably at some point, we'll have to start charging for that, if only to avoid exploding our servers. Or whatever decentralized backend will eventually put all of this on. The second piece is, as I said, the website is going to function a little bit like a DeFi app store. So anybody can create a DeFi Analytics app and monetize that as well. So there'll probably be a revenue share there, like an app store. And the final one is the Zaps, or the beams, we're going to call them. But it's that execution layer. So if SimpleFi has helped you to make a decision about where you want to move your funds from one combination of pools and farms to another, and you use the tool to zap that into a new set of investments, then we'll probably charge a little fee on that just for the convenience, and that will all accrue to the treasury.
For listeners that are interested in what you're talking about and want to participate and get involved with SimpleFi, what's the best way to do it?
There are several ways, actually. So we got a grant from the Graph to integrate more DeFi protocols. And we're giving out grants ourselves for any protocol that wants to integrate with us. It's really simple. You just build relatively simple. You build a subgraph, and then you can be integrated into that whole data layer that we have. So that's the first way that you can participate. It is like, if you're in a community and you want to get your protocol indexed, come and talk to us. The second one is to use the platform. So currently we're in closed beta, but probably by the time that you'll be airing this, we'll be very close to opening that up. And if not, then the waiting list will be probably quite large. And if you're very nice on the Discord, we'll probably give you an access code, and that's how you can spend time with it. The only thing that we're asking for right now is to just get as much feedback as possible, so we can keep improving the product and making it as useful as possible for people.
Well, it's very exciting. And of course, I want to encourage listeners that are interested in this solution to definitely reach out and explore more. It's SimpleFi, that's with an FI, simplify.finance. So definitely encourage listeners to check it out. I want to go back to something you said there about the graph. You've mentioned a couple times the graph in your answers, and just there you said you applied for a grant and you're actually handing out grants. Can you give a little more detail on why you applied for a grant and what you're doing with that?
The reason why we originally applied for a grant is because when we started building SimpleFi, as I said, one of the biggest needs that we had in order to calculate your ROI, for example, and that was the starting point, really. When we started, we were really focusing on ROI. Obviously, it's broadened since then. But we needed to index all of these positions in order to programmatically be able to tell you, just by plugging in your address, how much you've made from your investments, and calculate that in different ways. So in order to do that, you need to look at the balance at every block of every account and every protocol, and then price that historically. So there were really two choices there. Is either we build our own indexing technology as a kind of a walled garden internally, and we get the data that way, or we try to use an open protocol like the Graph. And really, there is only the Graph as a solution right now that gives you that level of flexibility that you need. There's obviously a lot of services that provide DeFi data or on-chain data and everything. but there's nothing that allows you to create a very consistent schema and map all of the protocols in a consistent way. So in our documentation, you can see, if you're interested in building your own subgraph, you'll see that we just have some very typical streamlined entities and fields that we need to index on every block. And then if we have that, you can automatically get indexed into our platform. So the data is there and people can start seeing their ROI and recommendations and things like that on the website. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the graph. So when we were looking at it, we're like, well, we're building something that probably be quite helpful for other people because all the subgraphs are going to be open. So let's just apply for a grant and see if they'll help us out.
When I get the opportunity to speak to a user of the graph, like SimpleFi, I always like to ask this question of the decision you just described there. Do it ourselves or use the graph? Can you just take listeners behind the curtain a little bit in greater detail why it is that people end up choosing the graph? There must be costs, pain points, resource constraints that prompt users to select the graph?
It's really a trade-off, I think. So definitely I think you can hack together some kind of indexing infrastructure relatively easly. I might get slaughtered for this by my CTO and sorry, Filippo, in advance. But and Tarun, who leads all our blockchain initiatives. But no, I think you can do that. And actually a lot of DeFi teams and NFT teams and things like that, like some of them just have their own indexing technology. They'll have an archive node and run some scripts on that just for their needs. And I think that can work for a single project, or they can just even fork the indexing infrastructure that the graph already has and just run a node for themselves, right, without connecting to the broader ecosystem. The thing is, though, that, as I said, becomes a walled garden, and it's not open, it's not collaborative, it's not, and it means that for a team like us, we would need to create an SDK and all kinds of infrastructure around it in order to allow people to index themselves, because that's one of our big focuses is that, and this is one of the great things about the graph, is that it's really hard for one single team to stay on top of all of the DeFi protocols and all of the things. So it's much easier if people can just integrate themselves, build their own subgraphs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it really depends on the use case. And the way we were looking at it, well, it's like either we can spend a year trying to recreate something like the graph for our own purposes, that's maybe a little bit more optimized for what we want, because, there are still some challenges to working with the graph, definitely, that you have to take into account. But, do we want to do that, or do we want to focus on just getting a product out using the existing infrastructure that will then evolve as the graph evolves as well and allow more people to participate faster?
Well, I'm a little intrigued by what you said there. It sounds like for your particular use case and some of the things you're working on, you've also had to provide feedback and grow a little bit with the graph. What's that experience like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's still very early days, right? I think even people from the graph will tell you that this is still a technology that's really evolving and evolving quite quickly. I think they only launched the mainnet a few months ago, less than a year ago, I think. And there's still some tooling there that needs to be built. There's still some optimizations around indexing times that they're working on. And they've been quite open, actually. I mean, the thing about SimpleFi is that the subgraphs we build go into much more granular detail than most subgraphs. Like most subgraphs will look at the protocol level data, overall TVL or TVL by pools or whatever, volume of transactions for a DEX, for example. And we're really digging into the account level data. So we're taking snapshots for each account at every block, what your reserves are. And that's where we hit some challenges, just like maybe some things weren't, or they didn't have that use case in mind. So you have to find some workarounds. They can be pretty heavy subgraphs as well. So they take quite a bit of time indexing. And I have to say the graph has taken on board a lot of our feedback, being very collaborative, trying to help us through those humps. There's definitely more to be done, and better tooling, ever better tooling, up only. But yeah, no, it's been quite a good experience, and it's a kind of a two-way interaction there, where we can help push the boundaries and they can respond to that and, help us also find ways of optimizing what we're building so that it makes it easier to index or faster to query or whatever.
What's your advice for any listeners that are contemplating applying for a graph grant?
Just go for it. Honestly, it's good to look at what other grants have been provided in the past. It's good to explore the space a little bit as well. Go and listen maybe to some of the presentations that have been made by the graph and all of that to try to understand where they are in the process, because there's a lot that's been done already and there's a lot of stuff that's being worked on. So it's good to try to fit into that whole flow of things before you apply and avoid wasting your time. But otherwise, they're very open, very responsive. They'll come in if they have questions. They'll try to scope things out. Like there was quite a bit of back and forth we've actually got a couple of grants from the graph, and just a little bit of back and forth to help clarify the scope and things like that. And then once it's done, you have access to all of the engineering team and from Edge and Node and Figment and others, and the foundation and all of that. And everybody's kind of trying to help each other build and resolve any challenges that you might have.
How important do you think a solution like the graph is for Web3 and even DeFi? And I'm asking because, as you said multiple times, alternatives to a solution like the graph are walled gardens, and that starts to look a lot like Web2 to me. So it seems like for Web3 and DeFi to be fully evolved and adopted throughout the world and achieve that ethos, something like the graph is necessary. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I've been in this space for a little while, and I remember there was a whole phase where people were talking about open source block explorers, because there is a fundamental challenge in this space to go and retrieve historical data. It's just not easy to do from an archive node. It's very inefficient. It takes a very long time. It's heavy infrastructure and it's inefficient. So that's why you need indexing solutions. And that's why people were focusing on it at one point. And that's, I think, why the graph evolved from that whole kind of thinking. And something like the graph is very important because it's open and it's flexible and it allows people to collaborate on standards. We're in a couple of working groups where we're trying to establish, what's the optimal way of building these subgraphs. What should we include? What should we not include for different use cases, so that we can reuse that technology and stop, reinventing the wheel all the time. I think it's very important. It's very important.
If you could go talk to all the people that you worked with in traditional finance and tell them what's coming or how to prepare for a world in which DeFi is more widely adopted, what would you tell them?
Just start playing around with the technology, really. Just look into it. Provide liquidity, yield farm, get rugged, get wrecked. It's okay, just start playing around with it. There's so many opportunities there. And if all of these people, you're seeing already like a wave of people just coming into the DeFi space that are leaving their traditional finance jobs and starting to set something up. There's a reason for that. It's because it's really exciting. It's really new. There's a whole field of innovations possible. And the more experience we can bring in from TradFi and blend it with this, the potential and the power of these new technologies, so much the better. They're gonna make a killing as well.
Does DeFi change the world?
That's a very tough question. I don't know if it changes the world. I'm on the fence of that one. What it definitely does is it allows more people to participate in the financial system and in a global financial system. It definitely allows more people to build their own financial systems, to work with each other, with like-minded people, without having to ask anybody's permission, and build things that they feel are necessary without having to jump through tons of hoops, without having to go through gatekeepers and all of this stuff. So I think from that perspective, but that's true of crypto and blockchain as a whole, I think, or public blockchains as a whole. Does it change the world? When you ask if it changes the world, does it change human nature? I'm not sure that it fundamentally does, but it definitely opens up the the field of possibilities for more people to participate and people that are maybe locked out of the current system in a way that just hasn't been possible before.
Well, Raphael, I appreciate you taking the time and answering some of those questions. It's now time for the GRTiQ 10. These are questions I ask each guest of the podcast to help listeners learn something new or try something different or achieve more. So are you ready?
Sure, let's go.
The GRTiQ 10. This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
That's a hard question, but I think when I was doing my media studies back at university, I read a lot of books and articles there, academic papers and things like that really forced me to rethink the way I see the world. So, some authors are super well known, like McLuhan, Understanding Media, the medium is the message and things like that. Others like Guy Debord, The Society of Spectacle, all of these theories around how mediated we have become as a species, like how society works. We're being less and mediating more. And it's all a big show, essentially, that kind of can dull our critical thinking, especially when then I went to work into PR and lobbying and things like that. You see how messages in society are managed and how populations are managed as well, like how the collective thinking is managed.
Is there a movie or a TV show that every human should be required to watch?
I don't know. There are so many of them. I think, what I really liked recently was that Netflix movie, Don't Look Up.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
I got really, in my entrepreneurial journey, I think that the best advice that I got, I was struggling a little bit at some point with just selling my project. I was just feeling uncomfortable with just selling it, raising funds and things like that. This was for a previous company to SimpleFi. It was the social impact stuff. And there was, as part of an accelerator that I did, there was this business coach, entrepreneur, life coach type guy who gave me some great advice. He's like, well, why are you struggling with this? I mean, what you have is a gift that you're giving to people. So, and either they want it and they take it or they don't. So it should take off a lot of pressure from you to do that way. And it really unlocked something in my mind. I was like, well, yeah, actually. So now I think about it, is this a gift worth giving whenever I'm building something? Because if it is, then it sells itself if you consider it in that way. It just helped me a lot.
Raphael, if you could listen to only one music album for the rest of your life, which one do you choose?
Again, so many. But if I really had to choose one, it would probably be Queen, Greatest Hits.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people know?
I don't want to be presumptuous at all because I'm always careful about what people know or don't know. I don't like to assume anything anymore because quite often you get it wrong or I get it wrong. But definitely I think that maybe people who want to become an entrepreneur, just talking about entrepreneurship, I think I said this already earlier, but it's easier to build something that you know about. And before you build something, it's better to go and learn about it. And I think people get enamored with the entrepreneurial lifestyle or mindset, and they'll just build any old thing that they think might be a good idea. And it just makes it much more difficult. I think that's probably one thing that I've learned.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
This is really simple, actually. It's just sports, regular sports and sleep. It's not really a life hack. It's just like a normal thing to do. But it's like, for me in particular, I tend to forget about those things. It's just like really easy to just sit on my ass and work on a computer and work part of the way through the night and then not get a good night's sleep and then just not make sense the following day or feel lethargic. Sports and sleep.
Based on your own experiences and observations, what's one habit or characteristic that you think best explains people finding success in life?
I'm going to talk for myself. Like one thing, because I'm just like really attuned to that when I meet people or people that I think are successful, in whichever way you want to define that. I just find that they generally have they just have this bloody minded tenacity about them, where they will just carry on doggedly doing things. And again, I talked about that before. It's that resilience, I think. And I don't know if it's a habit exactly, Maybe it is, it's something you need to feed, but yeah, definitely that.
Raphael, the final 3 questions are complete these sentence questions. The first one is, the thing that most excites me about Web3 is?
It's the same thing as what I said before. What excites me about Web3 is that it's really has this potential to be liberation technology. It gives people the freedom to just transact and organize themselves in a really autonomous way, in a way that they want, build their own financial system, build their own communities with their own rules.
Complete this sentence. If you're on Twitter, then you should be following...
SimpleFi. Sorry, I'm not going to turn that one down.
And the last one, complete this sentence. I am happiest when...
My to-do list is empty enough that I can be present with friends and family. I think that's the biggest challenge sometimes, is just having something else on your mind. I really want to spend that quality time with the people I love.
The GRTiQ 10.
After this, can I show you how deep the rabbit hole?
Raphael Mazet, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous, and I appreciate all the information you've shared, particularly about this exciting project, SimpleFi. If people want to keep in touch with you, stay up to date on the work you're doing, what's the best way to stay in touch?
Definitely go to simplify.finance, our website. All our social links are there. Discord is probably the best way to come and talk to the team, get involved, find out about the opportunities, and become part of the community. We've got a lot going on, as I said. And if not, at least if you go to the website, you can just use the app.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRTiQ Podcast. Roger that.